world. Thanks for joining us. We have a special event tonight. We're going to show you everything there is to know about ASP.NET Core and other things in .NET Core, I take it?
Sure.
Mostly ASP.NET.
Yes.
That's
mostly ASP.NET.
But our own Jeff Fritz, who is local to Philadelphia, is going to present. Of course, he is part of the Visual Studio product team. And I will just turn it over to Jeff now, and he can tell you all the details.
I'm just setting up. Are we on? What's the channel that we're on Twitch?
PhillyDotNet. All spelled out.
Let's set up the host over there. Hey, look, that's me. Is it? Did I lose the thing?
You did something. You're not on online anymore.
Hang on. How's that?
There it is.
There it is. There's a thing. See that? Hi, friends. It's me. It's your friend Jeff. I've been here. My name is Jeff Fritz. I'm a program manager on the .NET team, .NET and Visual Studio teams. I specialize in community events, big conferences, Ignite, Build, .NET Conf, MVP Summit, Dev Intersection. I help plan, coordinate content for those. And I also stream live on Twitch, so I can answer questions from folks and I can help out if you're building something and you want to see some different ways to do things with .NET and C#. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/C#Fritz. You can find me out there 5 days a week, 10 a.m. to about noon Eastern time. And for those of you that are out there watching, drop me a follow. Click through to Twitch TV/C#Fritz and you'll have a good time. So today I want to talk to you about full stack web development with ASP.NET Core. We're going to talk a little bit about the new .NET Core that's available, .NET Core 3.1. We're going to talk about the new ASP.NET Core features that are available. We're going to talk about Blazor. Anybody hear about Blazor here in this room? Of course, right? Everybody in the room, the thousands of people in the room, out there, chat room, you couldn't hear it because the microphones aren't in here. Thunderous applause. They're so excited about Blazor. So excited. So let's talk about ASP.NET Core. You know ASP.NET Core is your open source cross-platform and extremely fast framework that you can use to build web applications, right? Everything is available online. All the source code for this is available for you. We aren't pulling any punches. Every line of code is available for you to check out, inspect, and make changes to if you'd like. Send us pull requests. Really, really great stuff out there for you to look at. And it works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's completely cross-platform. It's great. And of course, it's blazingly fast. I'm going to talk about how fast it is in just a minute. So .NET Core 3.0 was released back in September. And if you are using .NET Core, you need to keep an eye on this. Because it's one of our current releases, it's only going to be supported for a few more months because we released a new .NET Core. But starting with .NET Core 3, we added WPF and Windows Forms support. Who's building a Windows desktop application here in the room? Supporting one. One person, 2, 3, 4. Okay, about a quarter of the room is supporting some sort of desktop application. That's great. You can run that now. You can recompile, convert it, and run on .NET Core. So just like you can with ASP.NET Core, you can get that side-by-side deployment of your framework with your application. So you don't have to wait anymore for folks to give you the go-ahead, because now the current version of .NET Framework is 4.7.1 on everybody's desktop, and you can go deploy. You don't have to wait for that. Just deploy the version of the framework you need, and you're off and running. You can also build self-contained executables. Don't just put down the framework in the same folder as your executable. Package it in. You can make one executable that contains all of your DLLs, everything you need to run your application. It's going to make a bigger exe, but it's one file that you can copy down to folks' workstations, and it just works. Full stack web development with C# and Razor. Of course, I'm hinting at Blazor there. That's our new user interface framework. And there's new C# 8 language features. Very cool stuff. I mentioned about how fast it is. We are currently in the top 10 on the Tech Empower benchmarks. Now, at this point, with how the benchmarks have gone, there's not too much of a difference in these, and some folks are doing some interesting things to try and squeeze more juice out of their various frameworks. So when you look at the top 10 here, right, ulib, plain text, fit, these are frameworks that are built and you're going to write your web application in C++. Really? Really? Who wants to build a website in C++? There's a Java framework here, Wizardo, HTTP. That's pretty much an academic one. There's a C framework, another Java. A couple of Rust ones have snuck up in here, but they're open source things that don't have a lot of uptake at this point. And we run now into the commercial ones, ASP.NET Core on Red Hat and ASP.NET Core listed here at 8 and 9. But you're looking at 6.9 and 6.7 million requests. Is it a minute or a second? Okay, that is just, I think it's a minute. It is just stupid fast, okay? If you're splitting hairs between the 99.0 and the 99.9 and saying, well, I'm going to go use the Java framework because it's an extra couple 100,000 requests a second, please. You don't have that problem where you're splitting hairs at that point, okay? In fact, at this point, they've actually saturated the NIC, all right? The network card, it can't handle so many requests that are coming across it. So huge performance capabilities with ASP.NET Core. And how did we do it? What are the things that are happening here that allowed that to happen? So when we look at the change from ASP.NET Core 2.2 to ASP.NET Core 3, we went from 2.6 million requests per second to 3.2 million requests per second in the plain text middleware benchmark that we submitted. So that means, right, we increased the number of requests per second by 23%. And we cut our allocation from almost a gig of memory to 57 meg. 57 meg. Think about how small that is, right? That's not just an IoT device, right? My gosh, you can have that in a pen. You can have that. That's not just on a Raspberry Pi, because a Raspberry Pi has what, 8 gig of RAM now? That's nothing. This is nothing. 268 milliseconds time to the first request. But you see across the board, we've reduced allocations. We've reduced the memory allocation. We've kicked up the requests per second because we're no longer allocating RAM. We're using the span of T and memory of T constructs that are now available to us with our programming language, with our frameworks, so that we're not reallocating memory for every string that we interact with. It's in memory once, and we just move around pointers to that memory. We've got a new serializer for JSON, the new system text JSON serializer. It's tremendously fast. It has all the same features as JSON.NET, and it's faster. We've learned some things and we've improved it. In fact, we went so far as the folks that made JSON.NET now work for us and help work on this. Tiered compilation, just-in-time compilation. So we don't just build the software when you say build, but we just-in-time compile it ahead of time so that first request comes through faster. You're not waiting for the just-in-time compilation like we used to with ASP.NET Web Forms. Right? Come on, who's been building stuff with web forms? Let me see a show of hands. Right? Who's supporting web forms right now this week? All right, about a third of the room, fourth of the room. But you didn't inhale. Actually, what you don't know is in the background here, I still have an application, an ASP.NET Web Forms application that's still just-in-time compiling. I kid, it's not. And we improved the garbage collection memory reservation defaults. Now you can tune and adjust how much memory is being used by the garbage collector when you build your application. Now, ASP.NET Core 3 is, we call it a full stack solution, right? And you're used to building for what we called the front end, right? And that was what we now think of as in the cloud. You're going to build MVC. You're going to build Razor pages as your front end to your application. You might build some web APIs so that other systems can communicate with your application, whether they be mobile applications, other web services, desktop applications, IoT devices are going to connect through a web API. We've got SignalR, so you get that live connection that's being communicated back and forth, whether it's WebSockets or Forever Frame or the continuous buffering that we do. There's all kinds of ways that SignalR will make that two-way connection to your server work. And we've also got improved security and identity capabilities built into ASP.NET Core. And you know about this. You've seen these things that continue to grow and happen. But we've now got on the client side, Blazor, right? You've got a component-based user interface that goes back. It's the same thing. Hi there, picture people. Hello. We've got that same component-based driven development framework that we know and love, that you've had in WinForms, WPF, UWP. Did I just say UWP? Silverlight. Yeah, I said Silverlight. Right, ASP.NET Web Forms, these rich components that do so much of what your user interface needs, and you don't need to think about all the different ways that they're painting the screen. No. You configure the components and it just works. You have that again in Blazor. And the goal there is we want you to be able to build those single-page applications, those progressive web apps that are typically reserved for, I'm going to say it there, chat room, JavaScript. We've got a thing on my Twitch channel that I kind of horse around with JavaScript. And every time I say the word JavaScript on my Twitch channel, you hear horses whinny in the background like Frau Blucher from Young Frankenstein. So I know chat room is out there watching, and they're getting ready. They're expecting to hear the horses. There's folks that watch me on Twitch so much that when they're working at their office and somebody says JavaScript, they expect to hear the horses whinny like Frau Blucher in Young Frankenstein. So that's what we want you to be able to do, so that just like the folks who really like JavaScript can have that front-to-back complete JavaScript solution on the server with Node and in the browser with a JavaScript SPA framework, whether it's Vue or React or Angular or whatever the case may be. We want you to be able to do the same thing with ASP.NET in the cloud, all the way down to C# with Blazor in the browser. But for back-end services, we also want to support some of the new models that are available out there, like worker services. Folks have been building services that run in Windows for years, but there really isn't a good model for it for .NET Core or for us to build with .NET and deploy into Linux systems. So we put together a template, a way for you to use very much the same primitives, the same ways that we already build and work with ASP.NET in a new template that we call worker services. Think of it as almost the same thing, except it doesn't have the Kestrel web server in it. We've also got support for the gRPC protocol and framework so that you can interact with all those other folks out there that are building and promoting those protobuf transmitting services and clients that are available out there. You can connect to a gRPC endpoint as a client, and you can also stand up your own service using a very similar to ASP.NET Web API way to build a gRPC service. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. So how do you get started with ASP.NET Core in .NET Core 3? Real easy. Of course, you're going to go to .NET and download the .NET Core 3.1 SDK, because this should become like the first thing that you install on your machines now when you get a new machine or you start up a new virtual machine. Go to .NET, install the SDK. It's simple, it's easy to do. You don't need admin privileges to do that. It will work on every system that you're using. I don't care if you got a brand new MacBook, you got a brand new Lenovo, or you got something else, a Surface Go. You can install that SDK. Real easy to do. And then go install the Visual Studio of your choice. We've got Visual Studios for all sizes and all systems now, whether it's Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio 2019, or even Visual Studio Online. Anybody seen anything about Visual Studio Online? One person. Visual Studio Online takes all the stuff that comes with Visual Studio Code and makes it run in the cloud so that you can now access and run Visual Studio effectively in a browser as a progressive web app. There's more stuff coming about this. We just showed a private preview at Ignite in November, but there's a lot more coming about that in the coming months. I hope you stay tuned because we're really excited about that. Now, when we talk about how you do this interaction from the cloud down to the browser, how does that actually work? How do all these things work? Well, typically, right, for a lot of us that are .NET developers, ASP.NET developers, you've got your servers, you've got your cloud service. I don't care whose cloud you're using. I hope you're using a cloud that's blue. Blue. That's called Team Spirit is what that's called. And you're going to have running in the browser, typically, right, for right now, a lot of folks have one of these JavaScript frameworks, Angular, Vue, or React, and you do this back and forth interaction with the content up there. Well, we want to talk about how we can replace those JavaScript frameworks with Blazor. How does that work? What makes Blazor so exciting? What can we do here to build this next generation of applications using all those C# primitives and Razor templating that we know and love and is really, really cool? So Blazor is that client-side web user interface that's built with .NET instead of JavaScript. You can write those reusable web user interface components using C# and Razor, and we've been doing that for more than 10 years now. Think about that. Razor was in ASP.NET Core 3.5 back in 2009. We've been doing Razor for 10 years now. You can share .NET code now with both the client and the server, and there's an interop layer, so you can call into those JavaScript libraries as needed. You can go get started at Blazor.net. That's pretty cool that we got the .net domain name there. Huh? Would have been lame if it was blazor.microsoft.com or microsoft.com/product/dev/blazor/default. No, we got Blazor.net. Spare no expense. So that's great that you can run in the browser, but it's not quite ready in the browser yet. We're working on this. When it runs in the browser, it runs on top of WebAssembly. So inside of our browser, every browser now has this feature called WebAssembly. And I'll tell you why every browser has this feature. Because we had Spectre and Meltdown. Remember these? They happened a summer or two ago. Everybody's machine has this processor flaw, and we had to deploy new versions of operating systems and browsers because you could write some JavaScript that would overflow the processor, and you could send down some malicious JavaScript and interact with someone's machine. Well, everybody upgraded their browser, everybody got the newest version that included full HTML5 support, and that comes with WebAssembly. Ta-da! That means even your phones have this. Whether you're running Android or iOS, you have WebAssembly support. So what we figured out to do is let's send down a flavor of .NET that runs specially on top of WebAssembly, and we can build those Razor components that target that version of .NET on top of WebAssembly and interact with the HTML DOM. Brilliant! And it works. We'll take a look at that in a little bit here in our demo. But there's also the idea of, well, we want to run these things in the cloud on a server because maybe we don't trust the browser. We want to make sure things are secure. We want to control our DLLs a little bit. There's all kinds of reasons why you might not want to send all of your code down to some foreign browser that you don't know. That's okay. You can run it on a server in the cloud or in your data center, wherever that might be, and connect down to the DOM that's running inside the browser and send information back and forth. Tell it to repaint the user interface, or here's some new data to upload to the server and do that interaction. And we're going to let you do that using Signal R. Anybody remember using the old Ajax panels inside of web forms? Oh my gosh, everybody put their hands up here, chat room. You can't believe it. Everybody remembers the Ajax panels, right? So the Ajax panel was a square on the web page that whatever controls you put inside there, whatever was inside that square, you would click a button, you would hit a drop down or something like that. Instead of refreshing the entire screen and doing a full post back to the server, it would send back using JavaScript just that little bit of content that was inside that square and refresh the screen, right? Just that part of the screen, right? And it knew how to do this. You didn't have to think about it. You just literally put this magic square inside your application. We're doing the same thing with your application, except we're going to push the whole thing back and forth as things changes using Signal R. We call it a Signal R channel. So as things change and your users interact with your application inside the browser, instead of sending the entire page back and getting some response that happens and interacting with that, we're going to do a little bit of Signal R pushing of data back and forth and update the browser. Now, WebAssembly is currently in preview. This is a preview version that's available right now here in 2019, late 2019. We expect to see this released coming spring 2020. There might be a large conference that we're building towards. Not giving any hints, not saying anything, but it could be coming up in the late spring, and I don't want to build any anticipation for anything. Blazor running on server side, though, does work with .NET Core 3.0 and later. So if you build these Razor components targeting the Blazor framework, they'll work in both environments. So Blazor for WebAssembly, though, why would you choose one or the other? This is a question I get asked all the time. They're asking that in the chat room. Aren't they? They're asking that, Chris. I know they're asking that question. He's asking that question right here. Chris is asking it even though he can't turn on the microphone. He's so excited to ask this question. Why would I choose one or the other? You want to use WebAssembly for offline support or those progressive web apps where you need zero latency user interface. You need to interact directly with the machine. Okay? You're going to get static website hosting that you can do there. You're not actually executing code on the server. But you would choose Blazor server side if you need a thin client. You don't want to send down a lot of bytes to the browser, right? You might be sending down to an IoT device. You might be sending down to across a very thin network somewhere. Maybe you're targeting some areas way out in an area that has very, very bad network. You might want to use Blazor server then. You have the full runtime available to you, though, when you're on the Blazor server. Full .NET Core runtime running on the server. So you can do things like image manipulation really well on the server and scale as needed because all your code is on the server. You can do things like image manipulation in the client, but it's going to be running on top of that very small framework in the browser. So it might not behave quite the same way depending on the browser, depending on how things interact there. So let's get into our first demo. Let's talk about Blazor. Let's see the difference between these two things here and what it means to use client-side, server-side. And let's actually build a little application to get started here. What do you think? Sound good? All right. So I am going to escape out of here, and I'm going to make sure that my screen is duplicating. Ah, there it is. All right. So I've already gone out to .net. .net. Hello, I was on the network. I am connected. I would like very much to get to .net. Thank you. I already went out to .net and I downloaded the SDK. Right? .NET Core. Make sure you download the .NET Core SDK. All right. And of course, there's all kinds of versions available for you here. You can get an installer. It'll download a version for you automatically. If you're using Visual Studio, where is it? I want to see all the old ones. They move things around here. Not the survey. No. Where'd it go? There's a way to see all of the versions here. This one? Is it that one? I don't think it's that one. I want to get to all the .NET cores. Well, the network cut me off. I know. Yeah, the network cut me off. All right, we're not going to be doing that. Thank you, Microsoft. I appreciate that. Doing a great job there on IT. So I'm going to go to Blazor.net. I'm not going to go to Blazor.net. You're killing me here, Microsoft. I'm going to turn on my own Wi-Fi access point because Microsoft's Wi-Fi isn't working tonight. And I work for the company. There we go. So this is going over my wireless. So you can go to Blazor.net and you can get all the information you need to get started and all the description of the various things that I was talking about here. But what I want you to see is when you click the Get Started button, If you have the SDK installed that I showed you on that previous screen, there is an install that you can do for templates. And this version updates all the time that you see here in this window. All right? When you install these templates, you're installing them at the command line, but they're also made available to Visual Studio. It's one set of templates that work for both the command line and Visual Studio. So this works everywhere, right? It'll work on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It'll give you the templates so you can build in Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio 2019. Really, really great stuff. Now, I already have it installed. So let me start Visual Studio. I, of course, run the Visual Studio 2019 preview because I like to live dangerously. I want to show you the latest, coolest features as they're being built. And you can see a bunch of the projects that I've been working on here. Let's create a new project. Thank you. And I'm going to create a Blazor app. I've been creating Blazor apps recently, so it's on my recent list over here. It's also over here. Doesn't matter, they both go to the same place. And I'm going to call this Blazor App 10 because I'm not creative in naming my project names. And I have, when I click through to this point, my choice of two different templates. And here they were, the two that we saw earlier, server and WebAssembly, right? If I choose to build the WebAssembly, let me show you what this one looks like. It's going to let me build components that run on top of that WebAssembly framework, on top of DLLs that ship down to the browser. Now, I've talked about Blazor to this group before, so I don't think I need to go too far into this. There's my list of project files and folders, and it looks and feels a little bit like an ASP.NET project. I've got a www root folder that has an index.html. It's got some CSS. It's got some sample data here that we'll fetch, and we've got some pages built with .razor file names. So I've got an index.razor here that is quite simple. It's a page that's going to listen on the root, has some text here instead of an H1 tag, and I've got a survey prompt. I've got some way here that we're going to prompt folks with a survey prompt directive, this tag, which comes out of another component down here. And here's that component. Generates a div, it has a title that it passes through, that's a parameter, it's a property down here that we can use, and not bad. Okay, it does a thing. Let me start this with IIS and show you what this looks like, and more particularly, what it ships down to the browser. Now, it takes a little bit extra time to compile this because not only is it compiling it, but it's also just-in-time compiling it so that we don't have to run the just-in-time compiler that we know and love for .NET in the browser. So now, I get a Hello World app here. I have a counter that counts. I have a fetch data thing here that fetches that JSON. Let me show you what it actually looks like interacting over the network. So I'll refresh the browser one more time. And what I want you to see here is this is downloading 5 meg of resources. 54K was actually transferred because if you look at this, I got the 304 cached. Right? All this stuff is actually cached inside my browser. But look at all the DLLs it's sending. Right? Mono.js, this bootstraps the Mono framework. There's Mono running on top of WebAssembly. Blazor App 10, there's my application. And here's all the ASP.NET Core and system things that it needs in order to run. Now, when you think about an Angular application or a Vue application, there's a lot of files, there's a lot of content you ship down to the browser right now. And they're doing things to minify all of that content so that you have a smaller footprint when you transfer things with those JavaScript frameworks. Just like those folks, the .NET team is working to minify, to shrink the footprint that you deliver on this. But 5 meg to download to a browser, for those of us here in the States, that's not bad. I can do that standing on my head, right? If, though, you were in Australia, that's 5 meg is a lot. 5 meg over the connection to Australia is is a lot. It's going to take a while to download, but it'll eventually get there. And because you have the caching turned up here, you'll have great performance once it arrives. And I can navigate around the application, and you can see it doesn't actually do anything else here with the network, because everything is now running locally. It just fetched that data, 49 bytes it fetched, and it brought back and painted on the screen. But nothing else is actually doing anything here. It's all loaded. It's already there. All right. So that's a little bit of what Blazor WebAssembly does. And that's going to be coming later in the spring as a full supported framework. You can use it right now if you like. If you want to take that step and walk on the wild side, you can use it in preview mode now. But these components that you see here, like this counter component that is just counting, and a fetch data component that takes in an HTTP client and gets some JSON from the server, that it just does a for loop and paints on the screen, that's not too bad. You can do that now inside these components and reuse them across Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor server side. But let's talk about Blazor server side, because I think there's an opportunity there for us to do some really neat things now. All right. I'm just going to bring up my notes here so that I've got everything in front of me. Where'd they go? My notes have gone. 1 second. There it is. Not that one. Wrong one. My bad. I should have done this before we got started. Bill, you got me started too fast. This one. There it is. All right. So let's talk about server-side Blazor. So we have these controls, these components. They're not too bad. But when we build a Blazor app, right, we'll call this one 11. It's a new solution. And this time we'll choose server. This is built on top of .NET Core 3.1 in this case, and will run and compile and run as a server application. Sure, go ahead and close that. Thank you. If I look at the pages here, this is the same content we saw earlier. These components are the same. The using statement is different. We're injecting a service in this case that runs server side, and that service is going to do all the things we need in order to present data. But the point is, I don't need to do something significantly different here. I'm injecting how I'm going to interact with my data, and when I run this, let me start this and run it in a browser. Of course, everybody's favorite browser, Edge, right? Everybody uses Edge now, right? The new Edge with Chromium backing, right? Am I right? See, everybody in the room loves the new Edge there, chat room. It's amazing. I can't talk enough about it. So when you look at this one, let me do an F12 and show you what happens this time when we refresh. Hard refresh, I'm getting 200s for everything. It only shipped 400K to the browser. And I've got Blazor server JS now. I've got some other little things here, but it got a localhost page. If I pull this down and I start looking at that counter page, loaded very, very quickly here, and I'm not seeing additional data come down. Nothing new is coming down because it's established this connection and it's sending data using WebSockets. Check it out right here. This is a WebSocket connection. And it's actually, yes, whoops, indeed. It's actually sending a bunch of messages across it that we can inspect. Where's it? Here. And we can watch these populate all the different things that are going on the screen. So when I click that button, why am I not getting my messages here? It's actually just doing it all. Huh? Did I start the right one? I did, didn't I? I should be looking at the WebSockets here, right?
Just filter at the top.
That's the WebSocket. You should be able to see the various messages that are coming back and forth as they happen, as we interact with this. No, I'm not getting any of the messages. Okay.
Well, Edge does the messaging so fast.
Yes, Edge is doing the messaging so fast you can't see it. I don't believe that for 1 minute. Let me do this in Chrome. I had this running last week in Edge and it worked just fine. There we go. There's Chrome. Let's refresh. There we go. Now I can see the messages. Don't know why they're not showing up in Edge. But you can see as I click through and do things, here's the messages that it's sending back and forth. So let me go back to the counter over here, and it's rendering funny. Right, there we go. I'm going to clear this out, but when I click this, look at the messages, and you don't have to do anything. It's handling this. It's showing you exactly where on the screen I clicked that button, okay? And if the Control, Shift, or Alt, or Meta keys were held down at the same time. And it returned a message that says render batch, and it says on render completed. It's handling all of this for you to paint the screen. You don't have to think about it. It just renders and makes things behave appropriately for you. And I made this comparison earlier to the other server-side rendering frameworks that we've been using. And this looks and feels like web forms, right? We used to build like this. We used to put controls on a page or have components that we would compose together that would do different things. Look, I'm going to leave this running here in... I'll leave it running here in Edge, right? Here's my index page, hello world. And if I go into my index page, I can reference and add other components to this page using the same HTML markup that I'm used to. So I could say counter, and that'll reference this counter component over here. And if I just include that, right, I get, it's going to attempt to reconnect because it saw a change in the component. So it's restarting it, and I now have a counter component here, and it does the same thing. And I can add attributes to these. I can add parameters to them so I can interact, right? So, right, if I create a parameter, public int increment get set equals 1, then we could say plus equals increment count. This will refresh. Still works, but I can go over to my index page and I can add now a property called increment and say increment by 5. This will refresh. And I've now got something that isn't incrementing by 5. What? Public int increment. Oh. Pardon me. Refresh. And now it counts by 5s. Cool. Simple. But the important thing here is we're able to add parameters. We're also able to add event handlers, and we can start adding attributes to these. That looks familiar. That looks really familiar, right? So we got this weird idea in our mind. Folks that are building web forms applications now, you can build Blazor server-side applications, and you'll have a very similar experience if you take all of the controls and components and web pages that you've built, and you bring them over and you use similar constructs with Blazor on Blazor server-side. And if you're using user controls or some other custom controls, if there are Blazor components running Blazor server-side, when we get to mid to late 2020, you could also start using those as Blazor client-side if you wanted. So you've got this very interesting path. But a lot of folks are already using things like an ASP grid view, am I right? Or an ASP repeater, or an ASP list view, right? Or all these things that were those default controls. How do we get from there to here? So this was something that I discussed with the program manager for Blazor, Dan Roth. We actually discussed it on stage at Microsoft Ignite. You can find the video if you go out and you search for Microsoft Ignite 2019, Dan Roth and Jeff Fritz, I forget what it was called, Blazor for Web Forms Developers. And we're actually writing, search Bing, that's a great idea, Blazor for Web Forms Developers. Blazor, it's just that good. We're actually in the middle of writing an ebook for this. There's a preview edition of this that you can get your hands on. Look, that's me. That'll go over the various topics that you need to know in order to take your web forms application and migrate is too simplistic a term, but rewrite using similar concepts using Blazor. I'm not going to go through that. That's a talk for a different time. But the kind of the linchpin here is, gosh, you have all these user interface metaphors that you're already referencing and using in web forms that we know how they work because they've been out there for 20 years. Can you believe it? Web forms is 20 years old. And we can, I mean, web forms they're about ready to drink. In fact, in Canada, web forms can drink already. Can't rent a car, though. Okay, never mind. But what if we could start to do some of those things? And Dan and I got to talking. We said, wouldn't it be great if there was a community-based project, open source project, where folks could get their hands on some components that look and feel and behave the same way they did in web forms, but for Blazor. So about a week or two ago, I started this open source project. It's out at in an organization called Fritz and Friends, and it's called Blazor Web Forms Components. And what we've built here, we started with just the simple list view. And the idea is we want you to be able to use syntax very similar to this. These are all the things you can do with a list view in ASP.NET Web Forms. And there's a lot of stuff here. And there's these templates that you would use, right, for grouping and setting up various item templates and layout and what the various things look like. Well, we started prototyping what this could be using Blazor. And it's not bad. There's some features and things that Blazor doesn't support. We can't do a layout template. We can't start a control that hosts a template that injects other content. Blazor doesn't know how to do that yet. So we passed that feedback back. We might be able to do that in the future, but we think we have a workaround for that. But we started adding and building some of these features that you see here. You can bind to a data source. You can enable and make this visible, right? You can enable view state. It won't do anything, but if you have these properties set, it won't throw an error. The goal here is we want to make the on-ramp for you from web forms to Blazor as easy as dropping that. Delete that ASP colon, and it should just work. That's our goal. Copy your markup over. It's not going to work exactly the same. We're going to try and get it as close as possible. And we've built two controls so far. We built the list view, we built the repeater. It doesn't do all the edit capabilities, but if you're using it just to present data on screen, it works. We've got some samples that show and present that it works. But this is something that we think folks who are building and migrating applications would find valuable. What do you think, PhillyDotNet? Do you want an on-ramp to be able to take your web forms markup and get it working? I'm seeing a gentleman up here says, yes, that makes sense. A couple other folks are nodding. Okay. So, I mean, this is something as a community we're investing time into. This isn't a Microsoft-supported thing. This is a community thing. That's why it's not under Microsoft and it's not under Jeff Fritz. It's over here under this community organization, Fritz and Friends. And we're going to build this so that you can start to check it out and use it. The first version, and this is weird, my builds are not being found by Azure DevOps. Look at this. I click on a build and, oh, now it's finding it. Didn't find it earlier today. There's a version of this that's pushed out to NuGet that you can download and see our little list view in action and enable it inside of your project. So can I go off script, Bill? Do you mind if I go off script? You sure? Okay, I just want to make sure because this is a little bit dangerous here. All right, so I'm going to create an item group here, and I'm going to include a package reference to include. See, why am I typing this? Why am I typing this? I'm sorry. Let's do this. Delete that. I'm going to manage NuGet packages, right? Because that's totally a thing. It was. What are you doing? There it is. All right, browse. And I'm going to search for Fritz.Blazor. Fritz Blazor Web Forms Components. And it's downloaded a grand total of 27 times. That's how new it is. We literally started working on it this week. Like publishing it this week. All right, so it's available. So now if I go down to my index, right? Okay, I don't have ASP counter. That's not a thing. But I can do list view. Okay, check this out. I can even do run at. It doesn't actually do anything, actually, when you mouse over this, look. What do you mean cannot be inferred? You just installed it. Make it run at Jeff's house. No, it worked there completely. Type of component cannot be inferred. I don't have an item type here yet. Right, I need to put some sort of item type here. Item type is weather forecast. Weather forecast. Right, and that's under data, right? I would say data dot, yeah, weather forecast. All right, because you need an item type for your list view. Okay. So now, if I mouse over run at, right, it lets me just type whatever there. It doesn't actually do anything with it. But I can put here a select method if I wanted, not a selected index. And I can get the same features that I would have with model binding that was available inside of web forms. Okay, that's not bad. I can even use the service up here, right? So it brings back a collection of summaries. I can inject the service just like it's being done over here on fetch data, right? I can inject that service over here. And, right, I can do code on initialized async. Come on, you're killing me here with the formatting. Right, I can say, just like it did on the other one, come on, give me that. Thank you. Await. My typing. I'm not used to typing on this. Get forecast async. Sure. Date time dot today. right? And I can say, I can actually get a reference to this because now we don't have IDs inside of Blazor. We have refs, right? And I can point that to something here. Let me just call this my list view. Set up a, not a partial property here. And this is a list view of type data dot weather forecast called my list view, right? And I can say my list view dot items equals, I need to put the Blazor web components. Cool. Why am I getting a red line here? Cannot be private. Fine. Equals forecasts. Right? Yes, yes, I know. And I think that's it. Why am I getting a return? Nope. But I need to call base on initialized. And I probably should await that. Cool. So now I would be returning it into there, and I could have an item template, just like you would inside of web forms. Oh, and it feels so good to be able to do things like span, right? I need a context. Context equals item. So I can say at item dot, and I have all of my things here that I would be data binding to. So I can say summary. Really? There we go. And it'll do that repeat, so I see that summary there. And now I've got something that looks and feels like the list view that I had in web forms, but it's here on my screen. Not bad. And if I do an imports statement, I'll get rid of these headers in front, the Blazor web forms components dot. So we think that's something important that folks will be able to do and be successful with. I think it is. So we're going to push on that a little bit and see what we can do. But let's actually build something that does something interesting, right? Let's build, we had this crazy idea to build something that does currency exchange, right? Currency exchange is something that folks do, and it's a nice application to have. And there's all kinds of places you can get data about currency. So let's just write a simple currency converter application real quick here, because that's something that takes some data entry, does a little bit of business logic, and outputs some information. So let's just mock something up here real quick. If I put together two inputs, right? So if I have an input, and let's make this take a number, and minimum value will set to 0 because we input type numbers have a minimum there. I can now bind that to some sort of a property, right? And let's say I bind that to the from value, right? And let's create a property for that. That's going to be, let's call it a decimal. And this is the from value. There we go. We're going to have another property that'll be a decimal, and that'll be the to value, right? Those are a thing. So let's create that. We'll put that somewhere over here. To value. We're going to want to specify the currency name that we're converting from. So that's, we'll put that in a select here, and we'll bind that to, let's call it a from currency. We'll put that, make that a string somewhere down here that we'll save, right? So set up another property, string, and we'll call this the from currency. We'll need another one for the to currency, won't we? So let's create one of those, to currency. Let's also define the currencies that we want to interact with here. So let's make that a string array, and we'll call that currencies, and that's going to be a new, really, you're not going to give this to me? And let's have it make available US dollars and Canadian dollars, right? So now I can do a for each across this, right? Item in currencies will output an option, and we'll say selected equals, and we'll only mark this as selected when the item equals from currency, right? And the actual text we'll put in here, we'll make that the from currency, not from currency. There we go. So now we've got a simple for loop, and that's all C# that's going to execute for us. I can do the exact same thing for our to currency down here. I'll put a little arrow so you know that it's being converted from one to the other. And I'll change this from currency to my to currency. And we'll have this be the to currency. Oh, that's wrong. That should be item. Okay. So now I've got a little thing here. That's fine. Okay? Because if this is false, it'll not include the selected at all. So we need a little bit of code now to do the actual conversion, and we probably should have a button here that says convert, right? Button convert, right? And that button, well, let's put a little bit of CSS on this, right? Because we know how to do CSS. We're going to make this a button, and we'll make this the primary button so that it looks nice. And the method that we'll need in order to do that conversion, we'll just write a simple C# method, right? Void convert. And let's just inspect real quick. Let's say the rate equals, well, if the from currency is equal to the to currency, then we're going to output 1, right? If they're the same, the conversion rate is 1. Otherwise, let's also test if the from currency is USD, well, then it's converting to Canadian. Then the value would be, well, if we're going from US dollars to Canadian, it's like 1.3 or something like that. Otherwise, 0.7, it's something, right? Please don't make any financial decisions based on my fake code that I'm writing here. So if I'm doing the conversion, then the to value equals from value times the rate. That's pretty simple. And I want to make this convert method, right? That's simple business logic. And it's binding to these properties that I wrote here. I just want that to fire when this clicks, right? So on click equals convert. And I get IntelliSense here to specify, here's the name of this method. Now, if I've done everything right, I have 2 text boxes that are numbers that will be able to key in a value to, that'll have a couple of values appear, and we should be able to click and do a conversion. Who needs this for the birdie? Let's see if it'll compile and run. Let's see if you actually hit compile properly. There it goes. And it starts. So now I've got 2 text boxes. Both start with US dollars. And if I specify 10 US dollars and I tell it convert, I get $10 coming out the other side. If I tell it to convert to Canadian, I get 7. If I tell it that this is Canadian, I get back to 10 here. And if I change that back to US dollars, it goes from 10 Canadian to 7 US dollars. Now, why didn't I get it going the other way? That I got 1.3. There it is, 13, when I convert from US dollars to Canadian dollars. So I've got this very simple currency converter that has 2 text boxes, binds to some data, interacts using a C# method, and it feels pretty good for me as a C# developer executing in the browser. It's not actually executing in the browser because this is Blazor server side. It's executing on the server, and it's sending just the changes in data back and forth. Cool. I can do that. I know how to build applications that run on the server, and that's a simple application that runs on the server. Let me go back over to the slides. Let's talk about the next topic. Now that we've seen a little bit about Blazor, a little bit for folks that are using web forms, what you need to know, thinking once again about web forms and ASP.NET, when Blazor's running on the server, all of the state for your application is in memory on the server. That means that if you're going to run more than one server, you need to get back into managing state out of memory, out of process, from that server on a different machine. And we know how to do that already. We've already got things set up so that we can manage that state somewhere else. When you're running this on one server, if you're running in Azure a standard D1, that's one virtual CPU at 3.5 gig, you can get about 5,000 users running on that before you start to see latency kick in. You can get up to 20,000 if you bump that up to a D3 system running out there. Tremendous. If you need to have more than 20,000 folks using your application at once, congratulations, you've got a different problem. That's a great problem to have. But if you scale beyond that one machine and you start working on multiple machines by pushing your state out of process, you're going to be in great shape. Real app behavior depends on how your app uses memory, client behavior, network conditions, blah, 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 blah. Your mileage may vary if you build a bad application. With great power comes great responsibility. Am I right, friends? So if you write something that uses a ton of memory, it's not going to behave the same way. Okay. Let me talk about gRPC for a minute. gRPC is that high-performance, contract-based, and hosted service that a lot of folks are building and hosting out in the cloud. Broad interoperability with all kinds of different environments. It might be Java, it might be PHP, it might be Python. Well, now you can do it with .NET. We've got first-class support for this. It gives you great service-to-service communication. We used to encourage folks to use OpenAPI. And other folks said, well, we'd like to be able to use gRPC as our standard. We support both. Okay, you can build those clients that you need so you can interact with these rich web services in the cloud. And they're real easy to set up and use with the tooling that we have for you in Visual Studio. So there is a new project template that will also allow you to generate client code appropriately from those protobuf definitions that will be passed around by gRPC services. So let's take a little bit of a look at how we can use gRPC to build an application that runs in the cloud, a simple service. So let me exit out of this. Good. I'm going to close a couple of these. Yeah, we'll close that too. And let's start a new project here. Ta-da! And we're going to create a gRPC service. gRPC service 7, because the first 6 weren't good enough for PhillyDotNet. No, we want the 7th. So I'll create this. And we get a very simple service, go away, over here that starts up and looks like what we've seen in ASP.NET Core. We get a program CS, look, create web host builder. Tell me if you've heard this before. Create default builder, create web host defaults, use startup. Startup? Yes. Configure services, add gRPC, use developer exception page inside of our configure method so we configure our HTTP interactions. Routing, endpoints, including gRPC services, and a greeter service. So there is a service that's already defined over here in the protobuf syntax, right? So we're specifying the syntax is protobuf 3. We have a C# namespace, gRPC service 7, because it's the namespace that we have here. Package called greet. Service is called, the name of our service is called greeter, This was generated for us. This is something that came with the template. You would write your own service appropriately here that you wanted to serve. And it has a remote procedure call endpoint, a method called sayHello that takes in a parameter called hello request. Here it is here. Returns a object called hello reply. Here it is here. So my messages have a parameter, have an object, a parameter as part of those messages that are being sent back and forth, and an ordinal position. .NET Core is going to compile these for you and turn that into a partial for a greeter service, because that's the name of my service here, that we can then interact with. So, right, this was package greet. So greeter base, right? That's this. There's the service name. So greeter base. Check this out. You can actually see what .NET generated for you here. Generated by the protocol buffer compiler. Do not edit. This is meant to be a series of partial classes that you're going to merge with and be able to interact with. So we have a service that looks like, actually feels like, an ASP.NET Core controller. I have a task that returns a object type called sayHello, and it takes in that same method. This is an override because it's the exact same syntax that was defined here. And it's just going to return a reply with hello and whatever name was passed in. That looks pretty easy to do, pretty easy to interact with. I can build a client to interact with this now very easily. I can go say add new project, bring up a console application. Sure. There's my console application, and I can right click on this and go say add service reference. Oh, you love this. gRPC, yes, add a gRPC service reference. I can point to a URL where that proto definition is, or I can click browse here because I'm in the same project, right? I can actually browse over here and go and say, yes, give me that thing. And it's going to install all the necessary NuGet packages that I need in order to build and work with this. And there's my service reference. And I can, yeah, go ahead, save that, please. And I can see there it is, and it's generated appropriate client information for me here. And I can interact with that now appropriately from inside this project. So I can return this as an async task. And instead of saying hello world there, let's actually use that client, right? So I'll create a channel equals, right, let's go get a gRPC channel foreign address, and I'm going to take this and control dot here so I get my gRPC client. I'm going to do a control dot on this so I get my task. I need to specify the address. So where am I going to be getting this from? Well, by default, this service over here listens on localhost 5001. So I'm going to go connect to that to go get my data, right? And those of you that used to do, and may still do, WCF, let me know if this looks a little bit familiar, right? We're going to go get a new, well, I want a greeter client. Let me control dot on this and get my using statement. And that greeter client is going to communicate across that channel that I previously defined there. The reply that I'm going to get from the server, I'm going to be able to get by saying client dot, let's say hello async. I'm going to pass in a new request. Oh yeah. New hello request. I know how to do this. And right, I've got a name here, and it's going to be PhillyDotNet. That's pretty easy, and I will then say console, right line, my greeting is, and I will say reply dot message, right? Pretty straightforward. So if I start, look at this, right? Remember we used to have to do this when we built services before. Set my startup projects. I want to set it to start both. Right, so I can start both projects at the same time when I hit F5, apply that, and go. If I did everything right, here's my console app starting. We should see there's the service app. We should see the service, there you go. And it receives the request, and there is hello PhillyDotNet. So I've very quickly built a client, built a service, connected to that service using its definition of what the service is, and I get the strong typing from my client so that I can interact with it and produce meaningful output. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. I can work with that. I can live with that. Well, what if we took that gRPC capability, and what if we added that into our Blazor project? The gRPC client is just a .NET standard interaction. What if we built a gRPC service that connected out and specified an exchange rate interaction that we could do so that our Blazor component can get the exchange rate information for all the various currencies that are available out there from, say, somewhere like a large European bank, and publish that and make that available to us. So here is a library that we defined, currency exchange rate lib, and it's got this definition for what the service looks like to interact. Get the exchange rate with a request that has the type you want to convert from, the type you want to convert to, and will return an exchange rate reply that is just a double for the exchange rate. And we'll have an exchange rate request because you want to be able to say, well, show me all the currencies you know about. And that currencies request it's empty. We're just saying, give me all the currencies you know about, and we're going to return a repeated string of all the currencies that are being returned. And we have a definition here for what those look like in that interaction. And we wrote a gRPC service here that has that interaction and knows how to go get the exchange rates from an external location. That's pretty cool. Okay, we can do that. So it's actually passing in, right, an external service that we've defined here that knows where it is. And you can see it's right here, exchangeratesAPI.io, and it'll return the various currency information there, right? That's actually managed by a European bank that has a nice friendly API that we can bounce off of. So with that protobuf defined, we can go to our Blazor currency converter project, and this looks very much like the same thing. We wrote everything into a currency converter component that has, look, input, type number, select, right, binding from currency, the options with the list of currencies. But instead of having an array of currencies here, when this control is initialized, when this component is initialized, we're going to go get the currencies from that exchange rate client, and we inject it right here. So we're using gRPC. We're communicating with it using a standard client that's been defined by that protobuf. We've got it referenced and included here, and now we can start this up, and it will appropriately start up both services, and we'll be able to get the exchange rate information from our service running locally. There's my gRPC client running. And here's my Blazor currency converter. $1 US is this many Australian dollars, right? Or I can go choose any one of these currencies that that European bank knows about, and we can make those appropriate conversions. So I guess this is Danish kroners, right? And we want to convert that. Let's convert that to Canadian dollars, right? So one of those is 19 and a half cents Canadian, right? And right, I can make this whatever number, and it'll do those conversions for me. Okay? So now we've got services that run in the cloud, communicate out to other services, and have this rich interaction as a network of services across the cloud for us. And we're able to interact with it using C# and .NET in the browser or on the server using Blazor. Now that's one part of the story. This is when I sound like Paul Harvey. And now I'll tell you the rest of the story. Right? Something like that? Isn't that how we used to do that? Folks don't remember who Paul Harvey is. Younger folks don't. That's great. It was running as a console application. It'd be really nice if this was a worker service, because I might have some other things that run that aren't necessarily interacting with the web, right? They're doing some business logic. They're writing files to disk. They're interacting with some queues or some other endpoint. And we want to host these inside of either a Windows machine or a Linux machine as a service. So we get rich logging, and it starts automatically when those machines start and stop, right? It start the service automatically. It stops, shut down the service cleanly, and dispose of everything. Well, you can do that now with our worker service template. Let me show you what the worker service template looks like and some of the things you can do with it. So let me go back over here to Visual Studio. And let's create a new project. And I'm going to create a worker service project. There it is, worker service. Next, worker service 4. Yep, it's a worker service. And this one has a program CS. Look familiar? Create web host builder. I'll create a host builder because it's not starting the web as part of this. All the other things, though, that you get as part of an ASP.NET Core application are in there except for Kestrel, the web server. So logging, dependency injection, all that stuff is in there. And instead of using some sort of a controller, we now have worker services, which are just background services. We've got dependency injection, so we're passing in an iLogger for the worker. And this is just going to say, while we're not requesting cancel, just log worker is running at whatever time and delay 1 second and go run this again. That's a simple console application. There it is, right? And it's outputting sometimes. Okay, that looks like a service. Fine, it's outputting data. Big deal. How do I install that as a service? Check this out. If I right-click here and I say Manage NuGet Packages, Browse, there is a Microsoft Extensions Hosting Windows Services package here that you can add into your project. Yes, I accept. Does anybody ever actually read those things that NuGet brings up that says, do you really want to do this? Yes, do it. Get rid of it already. I don't care. My firstborn, sure, she's not busy. Go ahead, take care of it. Go ahead. You come down here into Program, and when you configure services here, I can say, I look at that. Where is it? Is it outside on this one? I think it's on this one. Use Windows Service. There it is. And now this will compile and build, will be available so that I can install it as a Windows service, and it will run in the background and log instead of to the console to the event log. That's interesting. Okay, now we're talking. What if I want to do this on Linux? What's that look like? Check this out. Check this out. We got you covered. You think we gave up on doing this for Linux, folks? Please. We have it available for System D as well. There it is. So you can add a very similar signature to the previous method that I showed you over here for use Windows service, right? Here, I'll even add it in. I'll do the thing. Right, there it is. Yes, top shelf. Oh my gosh, there's a reference. You could use Top Shelf to do this as well, but here's something that'll do the exact same thing. There it is, use systemd. And you can install this and use it as a Linux service as well. Cool. That's not bad. All right, now we've built something that's a console application and feels like an ASP.NET Core application. We know how to do both of those, and I can make it a service just by adding a NuGet package and not even a statement, a command on the end of this with a Fluent API. That's pretty cool. But wait, there's more. So that's how you would build a worker service. What about if we want to do live interactions using SignalR? Maybe we want to send messages down into that worker service as a SignalR client endpoint. Well, you can now stream data back and forth between client and server. We've also built in auto reconnect capabilities. That's important because if for some reason your server restarts, maybe it did an Azure DevOps redeploy, right? Because you've got continuous integration set up inside of your ecosystem, right? You have continuous deployment. You have continuous integration. Please, nobody tell me that somebody takes a USB key out of a machine, walks over somewhere else, plugs it in, and types setup. Nobody does that, right? Good. But I know those of you out there watching from Pittsburgh, you're doing that, aren't you? I know you are in Pittsburgh, because Philly's bad. Anyways, that's right, I picked a fight with Pittsburgh. So, those are things that you can do and have it automatically reconnect now with SignalR. There's also iasync enumerable support from C#8. What does this mean? This means that you can stream data, stream a collection of data, send it to the client, and have it run asynchronously. You're not waiting, you're not blocking, right? That's a new feature in C#8 to be able to iterate over a collection without blocking as it's fetching and interacting with that data. So I'm going to show you a quick sample of how we can interact with SignalR and get it to auto reconnect to things with streaming. So I've got a sample that my friend and the SignalR program manager, Brady Gaster, already wrote for us, called the real-time timer. Real-time timer. That's one too many times. So this, right, has a SignalR hub here. And what this is going to do is create a channel, and while we're connected, it's going to write data asynchronously. Every 10 milliseconds, it's going to write the current time all the way down to fractions of a second, okay? And it's going to write that into the stream, into the pipeline. And on my index page here, I'm including my site.js, and the site.js is going to connect to that server timer stream, and it's going to set the inner text to whatever time is being sent across that stream, all right? And when it gets reconnected, it's going to restart streaming again, okay? Let's give this a shot. Let's see how this works. Now I'm going to start this using IIS Express, and I'm going to run it without the debugger attached so that we see it running really, really fast, okay? That's being generated by the server and being streamed to the client. Now I'm going to put this side by side with Visual Studio so that I can stop this and restart it, hopefully quick enough. All right, so I'm going to go into IIS. I'm going to stop the site, and I'm restarting it. There it is running again. But my other one should reconnect and start streaming again very, very quickly here as soon as it finds that the server is available again. There it goes. So there's a back off, there's an incremental back off that SignalR has built in now that you can control, you can configure, where it will retry. It's like 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 60, then 90 seconds, that it will try to get reconnected. There's definition in the docs as to what those retry intervals are. But you know your system best. We think we have a reasonable first definition there. You can define on your own what interval you want it to reconnect and try and re-interact with your SignalR endpoint. We think this is something that folks are really going to be excited to use because it makes SignalR clearly more dependable, right? Nobody likes seeing when you're watching the sports scores on ESPN or choose your favorite sports website. Nobody likes seeing that it all of a sudden stops sending data to you. It's like, what happened? The Eagles it was 3rd and 2. Did they score? Did they make first down? What happened to the Eagles? And that's just their offense. Thank you, Chris. They're just slow. Okay, glad we got that. Unlike Pittsburgh, I'm not going to pick on Pittsburgh anymore. So, too late. Already went there. Cat's out of the bag. So we think the streaming code.
Seeing what it did. Now looking at the code might make a little more sense.
Sure. So if we look at the hub, this is a server timer hub. Creates a bounded channel, and we're going to write data asynchronously onto that channel with a cancellation token being passed in here. All right. And down here, we're writing that data asynchronously, and it just writes, while true, it's going to write that down into it. That's all it's doing. The JavaScript to present it is streaming to the server timer, which was that. And for the next value that it gets, it updates the status element. All right. Good question. Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to go back and show that again. And I'm right up against the end of time here. I want to make sure that I have time for questions. So all kinds of new features in ASP.NET Core 3, Blazor, gRPC, worker services. You saw those, SignalR, auto reconnect, and streaming. There's updated templates for Angular 8, React 16. Worker services, SPA authentication now works great using ASP.NET Core. There's an HTTP REPL available for you. HTTP 2 by default. You can take a picture of what's listed here, but for the full authoritative list here, go to that link that's at the bottom. Those are the official release notes for ASP.NET Core 3. That's ASP.NET Core 3. 3.1 is largely a set of bug fixes and performance updates, stability updates, and it gives you the long-term support for this. And that was released at the beginning of this month. So what you're going to get in here are component partial classes. That's when you're building Blazor components. You saw me reference that list view. I have a series of partial classes that live behind that implement all of the web forms, interactions, and APIs there for you. A lot of great stuff for Blazor. That's been a lot of our focus. Incremental updates only in there. I'm going to skip over. You saw a little bit of the Blazor interaction that I showed you already. If you want to walk through and do a workshop, if you want to do a hands-on get started with Blazor workshop, if you go to this address, bit.ly/FritzBlazor2019, the Microsoft Blazing Pizza workshop is available for you, and this specifically will get you to my flavor of it. It has a 6-hour walkthrough of the entire thing. It's available on YouTube, and I talk through the entire thing for you to be able to see exactly how each step works. You're welcome to work through it on your own and follow the directions, but some folks like to have an instructor that talks through it. You can see that if you go to this address. All right, so you mentioned long-term servicing release. What's that mean? And what's that mean for our schedule? And we had some questions with some of the MVPs here earlier before we got started about the .NET release schedule. What's that mean? What's that look like? Well, in July of 2019, just 6 months ago, we released the .NET Core 3 release candidate, and .NET Core 3 was released in September 2019. .NET Core 3.1 was released 2.5 weeks ago, and that's this long-term support version. That means you have 3 years of support from December 2019. So you can continue using it and go full support from Microsoft until December 2022. Going forward, we project our schedule, and this is what we're going to work real hard to stick to. Every November, we're going to release a new major version of .NET. Notice I didn't say .NET Core, .NET, because we're going to get to a point here where I don't have my Highlander sound effect. There can be only one .NET. No longer .NET Framework, .NET Core, Xamarin. laying all over the place, all these different flavors. No. Only .NET. You will have one framework that you can use for mobile, cloud, desktop. And it'll just work the same everywhere. There are different workloads that you'll use for each of those environments, and that's going to be coming with .NET 5 in November 2020. This was announced by Scott Hunter back at Build. We had a little bit of a status update at Ignite. And there's more information coming about it in the next few months as we get closer to that May conference that I hinted at. There is in May 2020, that is when we expect to deliver the RTM for Blazor WebAssembly. We want to have great tools for you. We want to have great performance for you. And you hopefully will see that in May 2020. Like I said, we're building towards that release. Any questions before I get to the wrap-up slide with just the resources? I covered a lot. I went over a whole bunch of things here. I touched a lot on Blazor, .NET Core, RPC, we went gRPC, we went into worker services a little bit. I didn't touch on the desktop applications. Anybody have any questions for me to answer? How we doing, Chris? What are they saying on the chat room?
The big thumbs up. Single artist.
Cool. No questions. It's just that good. Yes, in the back, there's a question.
So, what would be the main difference between our application on a framework like Electron and WebAssembly?
Okay.
Electron slows down.
So the question is, what's the difference between hosting an application inside of Electron versus hosting on WebAssembly? So Electron is what's interesting is Electron is an application shell that's built on top of the Chromium browser, and it has all the web browser things removed, so that all it is the browser minus the Chrome, right? You can't have the back and forward and address buttons on there, but it hosts HTML. And because it hosts Chromium, it also has the ability to run WebAssembly. So WebAssembly will run in both the Electron shell and inside of the browser. We hope to be able to run Blazor inside of Electron at some point. We've tested it. It's something we've experimented with. We think there's possible future there, which then makes things really interesting because, well, build with Blazor, put it into an Electron app, and Electron apps just work on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Now you've got really portable applications. Performance-wise, yeah, it does slow down a little bit when you're running inside of Electron because of the way they compile and run things. But because of Edge now, and the fact that Microsoft owns GitHub, which owns Electron, we've got a lot of influence to try and push this in a way that we think will make everybody succeed, not just WebAssembly and Blazor and Edge. We think there's a great opportunity there to make the browser and those browser-based applications work great everywhere. So keep your ears open. Particularly, there's a Blazor event that we're hosting January 14th. It's a virtual event, just like .NET Conf. We call it .NET Conf Focus on Blazor. It's a virtual event that you're going to be able to find from Channel 9. It'll also be on our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Visual Studio. You'll be able to see this event where we're talking about all the cool new things that are happening with Blazor. We have a couple of product announcements we're going to share with you then, and you'll be able to ask questions and interact with the speakers to learn more about where WebAssembly is going. So that was a lot of answer, and I went a little bit further past what you were asking, but I think that hopefully gets you steering in the right direction. Down front, Bill, how can I help you, sir?
So all your demos and a lot of the tutorials, they're using the add code section inside the editor file.
Yes.
And many years ago, they were pushing the idea of having a separate CS file.
Yes.
Your model or whatever the platform's called. So is there any guidance or any trends that you see?
So the question that Bill is asking is about, let me go to this one. When folks build and we show in the demos, you typically see us put the code right here inside of the same file as our markup.
And Visual Studio handles
Visual Studio handles this fine, and this is something that we're seeing more and more. Folks are they're more comfortable with putting their code in the same file as their markup, right? Folks that build with React are very comfortable with putting their markup, their user interface code, in the same file as the stuff to interact with that. And as Bill said, I can move this out into what we used to call a code behind in web forms. We called it a page model with Razor pages. Right? I don't even have to call inherits here. I can actually specify a file with the same, right? If I call this index.razor.cs, this is one of the things that came as part of 3.1. I can make this a partial class, and I can take all of this, stick it right there, and it just works, right? Look at all the red lines. It's going to compile and they go away because it sees this partial class and it knows that that's the same page that it's referencing, right?
But so now that the Visual Studio 2019 tooling is so comfortable at code, there's less. I would say less.
Is there okay? Let me repeat for the folks that are watching and for the recording. The question is there less value in putting the code there in the Razor component markdown here as that code block versus putting it in the component base over here inside that C# class? And I'm of the school of thought, and I'm kind of old school like this, even though I'm kind of new school like this. I'm of the school of thought that I like these values in the class, in the C# class, because then I can unit test the class. I can use a standard XUnit or NUnit unit test framework to actually execute this and make sure it's doing the right thing. When it's sitting inside of that code block, I can't. I don't have a way to reach in and test that until our friend Steve Sanderson, the engineer who started working and invented Blazor, wrote a test framework that interacts with this and appropriately will allow you to render that code. And it's gone further. A gentleman named Egil, I forget his full name and I'm going to blank on it. I'm sorry, Egil. I know somebody's going to tell him, Fritz forgot your name. I'm so sorry. Wrote a framework, and I'm going to grab the name of that framework out of my, where's the test project? Yeah, test. Out of my test project, there is a framework here called Razor Components Testing Library that you can use. It is in beta. Here it is. So this is Egil, and Egil is actually speaking as part of the .NET Conf. I don't know. I want to find out about Egil. There he is, Egil Hansen. And this will allow you to test by rendering your Blazor components and getting out of it what it actually rendered. So you can actually click buttons and do those interactions with the user interface using this framework.
And have your code in the act code section.
And have your code, where your code is located doesn't matter. Okay. It will.
I like the code and markup together.
Okay.
It makes the idea of a component.
For the folks that are watching, Bill likes to have the code and the markdown in the same place because it then feels more like a component because it's in one file. And the Vue folks, the React folks love it like that, and I totally buy into that, and that's great. More than welcome to it. I like having my C# in one file and have my markup in the other. Don't let your chocolate touch my peanut butter. But if you put them in the same file, damn, it tastes good. Oh, I've had many. I may have had one on the way over. But we don't want to set a definition. We, Microsoft, don't want to set a definition that says this is the way you must interact with these. It's up to you. We want it to be flexible and for you to choose which way makes sense for you. It doesn't make sense for us to set a standard when this is so new. This is brand new concept, brand new user interface framework. We want you to figure out and use the syntax and the structure that makes sense for you and your teams. Thanks for the question. That was a great question, Bill. I'm glad we got to discuss. In the back, there's a question. So the question is performance. Which one's better, JavaScript or Blazor in the browser? And right now, Blazor is a close second, right? It's not going to perform the same once both get up and running. It's not going to perform the same because it is sitting on top of a virtual machine that's running inside the sandbox in the browser, right? Versus JavaScript's been optimized to the nines with the V8 engine inside of Chromium, right? That even though it's interpreting that, once it is interpreted, it runs really fast. It's going to be a question of comfort. You're not going to see, for 90% of what you're doing, you're not going to see a noticeable difference between the two. You're just not. But if you lob a giant application in there for either of the two frameworks, JavaScript, you might see a bit of a performance improvement. Better performance out of JavaScript than Blazor. But if you're building a giant application that runs in the browser like that, why are you building a giant application that runs in the browser? Just build an application at that point. Yes, down front, Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, so I'm using Blazor server side now to write a lot of in-house apps that we grid and graph, like we show performance servers and things like that. I'm very surprised about that.
The comment is Bill's building applications using Blazor server side to build graphs and all kinds of interactions with Java with performance data, and it's performing very, very well. We like to hear that. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the me too there. So, all right. Let me show you the last slide. We got about 4 minutes till we have to get out of here, and I don't want to anger the Microsoft people here because, no, not really. I'm a guest. I don't work here. Please try ASP.NET Core with .NET Core 3.1. Go to .NET, get the SDK. It works on every operating system except for your phone. VisualStudio.com, get your favorite copy of Visual Studio. Documentation, docs ASP.NET, docs.microsoft.com as well. Blazor's at blazor.net. You can get the source code for the workshop at aka.ms/Blazor Workshop. My name is Jeff Fritz. You can find me on Twitter, GitHub, Twitch, Instagram, Snapchat, PayPal, TikTok? Sure, TikTok. I am C# Fritz. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And I'm wearing an ugly sweater. The Avengers gave me this. So, time's yours.
Hi. Thanks for coming.
Was the food okay? All right, because they just opened down there like a month or so ago, and so I figured I'd give them a try, just to mix things up a little bit. The boss has a giveaway. Other than that, this is our the finish of our meetings for 2019. Woohoo! You could go look at the meetup site, but the first, technically the second Wednesday, January 8th, is our next hands-on lab, and we're going to do ML.NET, which is machine learning on Azure, using C#. So that is good stuff. So we're going to be doing that, and then 2 weeks after that, which would be the 22nd, I believe. 14 plus 8. Somebody do that. Yes. Yeah, they're one of those. We have a sponsor that's interesting. Has anybody heard the company Graphite? They're actually in Bryn Mawr. It's fascinating what they do. You'll have to see it. You should see it. No. But they have like a high-level application development platform that's all graphical. And the whole thing turns into a real nice C# full stack ASP.NET application in the background. It's interesting what they're doing with that. But they're going to sponsor, they're going to do the first hour, and then Mike Molesky, who's a popular speaker at our code camps, the second hour, he is going to show you how he uses containers and Kubernetes to do development work, and how he makes his development go faster. So looking forward to that. The other thing I'm proud to announce, in February 12th, we are actually having the Blazor Roadshow, which is traveling around the country, and that's Carl Franklin, popular for the podcast .NET Rocks, and he is coming. I think that's sponsored by DevExpress, but they're going to different cities, and they're going to do Philadelphia on that night. And then, of course, you'll see a lot of emails the first week of January. I'll be looking for speakers and sponsors for our next code camp, which is April 18th and 19th. I think those are the 2 dates. So get on the meetup site, take a look, make your plans, tell your loved ones, spend time now with me during Christmas because you're going to be busy doing .NET all next year. Have a nice night. Please clean up. Oh, giveaway. He's giving away.
I got stuff to give away. Let me show you. So check this out. Hi. So I stream online. I teach folks how to write code online, and as part of a group called Live Coders. We're a bunch of, there's 107 of us out there on Twitch. If you go to livecoders.dev, it'll reroute you to this website where you can find out about all these different folks that are writing code, answering questions live. They might be building .NET web apps. They might be building mobile apps. They might be building games. All kinds of great stuff that you can find here. There's Ed Charbonneau from Progress. Let's see, Little Bobby Tables is here. There's folks here building with Java, building mobile applications. David Orton now. This is Corey Weathers from Twilio. He's building messaging applications out here. This is Dr. Mikachu. She's actually the lady who announced and introduced the HoloLens at Build in 2015. She's building 3D games here with virtual reality. This is Callow Creation, and he's working in Unity right now. So you can learn about all kinds of great things from this group. And I'm the founder, and I help invite new folks and help spread the positive word about all the cool things that live coders do. So tonight I wanted to give away a backpack from the live coders. And I've also got, for folks that don't win tonight, socks! Azure DevOps socks. I've got one of those we'll give away, and I've got a bunch of pins here for folks. No, you only get a left. I only have lefts. You get 2 lefts because they make a right. But I have a bunch of buttons for anybody that wants those. But I thought I'd give away the backpack with, well, I'll make sure whoever wins the backpack gets a Live Coders button. I've got some Visual Studio Code pins here that the fine folks at Visual Studio Code gave me. And there's some buttons from the Live Coders team. So I thought I'd give away a backpack with a pair of socks, some pins, and a pair of socks there. What do you think? I don't know. Don't you have a thing?
I don't have a thing.
You don't have a thing. Isn't there? Didn't we used to do a thing here called the dollar bill?
We can do dollar bill.
Dollar bill bingo? A crisp one?
While I whip this out.
Whoa, Halo.
I've got a 20 here.
Yeah.
But you can use a 1, a 5, a 10. I really don't care. It's the funny green number.
The serial code.
Yeah, also called serial code. And the last 2 digits we're looking for, 40.
Congratulations.
Well done, me.
And do you want to do one more for a pair of socks?
All right.
And anybody else can come up and take some pins if they'd like.
I got 60.
Jeez.
How about, ooh.
60? There we go.
Oh, darn, because the next one was 69, and it made me remember.
There you go. And if anybody wants, I've got buttons from the live coders up here. I've got some Visual Studio Code Pride pins up here. You're welcome to them. Thanks so much, everybody.
Hey.